Hi, my name is Morgan Hawkins, and I'm here to talk to you about effective planning to me. This is something that's very near and dear to my heart because it's really where the classroom starts. I think it's very important for us as teachers to really truly understand what we're teaching and what our goal is for our students before we start teaching. If we're not doing that, we're not giving them an effective lesson that's going to help them carry the knowledge they need and have the assessment that we want in order to know where we want them to go. So I want to first start with an outline of what effective planning is. So effective planning, if you plan effectively, you are going to have good instruction and your students are going to get the achievement that they need and you're going to be able to find out where they were. So we need to be looking at what strategies we can use to be effective planners so that we can give the good instructions to our students, so we can get them to where they need to be, from the TEKS to if you have a tested grade, how are they going to test it, how are we going to assess them, and how are we going to give them the instruction that they need in order to get there. If you're in a lower grade level, you want to give them the instruction that they need so that they can get those foundational skills in order that they can learn the new things that they need the next few years in school. So I first want you to take a second and I want you to think about what effective planning means to you. So I'm going to give you a minute just to think about that. Now I want you to turn and talk to your neighbor about what effective planning means to you. And when you think about planning and how you use it with your team, go ahead and share about what you think about that. So I'm going to ask a few of you to share out. So if you would like to share, go ahead and raise your hand. So one thing that I thought of when I was thinking about effective planning and what it means to me, it means to be, to me, to be as effective as I can, to be the best that I can and give my students the best learning that they can. Because if I'm not using my time wisely and I'm not giving them those times, what is our planning time for? We need to get together, we need to have a plan for how we are going to make these lessons the best we can and what are the steps to follow. So throughout the rest of this PD, I'm going to use the time to look at what should effective planning look to you. When you get with your team once a week, what does that look like? How are we going to be effective planners? How are we going to use that extended planning time to our benefit and to our students' benefit to be able to give them the best lessons that we can? So I want you to keep in mind what you just decided effective planning in your head means, what it means to you, and what it looks like for your team. Because as we go through this, you might change your opinion of what it's going to look like with your team and what you think effective planning is. So as we get to the end, I'm going to ask you again what effective planning means to you so that you can start thinking about that. So effective planning has three parts to it. And I want you to notice that on every slide I've had a target so far, because effective planning is thinking with the end in mind. Where do you want your students to be? You have to figure out where they're going to be before you're going to figure out how they're going to get there, because we have to know the where. When you think about where you're going on vacation, you know the where first, and then you plan your way that you're going to get there. Are you going to fly? What way are you going to drive? But you know where you are going. So just like that, in the classroom, we have to know the where we are going, and then we have to figure out the how we're going to get there. So effective planning has three parts. We have curriculum, assessment, and instruction. Curriculum, I think, can have a lot of different definitions for you. So go ahead and share with your table what you think curriculum means. So some things that I heard when I was walking around is curriculum means the TEKS. Curriculum can mean what the curriculum department gives to us is our year at a glance and what that looks like. It can mean the lessons that the district gives to you. So curriculum can be many different things, but in our case, the curriculum is going to be our goals for the year, which is the state standards that the the state gives to us. And the district also provides some resources for us to teach those, so that can be included in our curriculum bundle. The next is the assessment. So what can an assessment look like in your classroom? So some things that I heard, it can be an observation. You can have informal assessments. You can have formal assessments. It can be just data that you gather it can be our MAT testing that you use in our lower grades. It can be our STAR. So there's lots of different kinds of assessments that we can use, and we're going to talk about that as we go through this lesson. Instruction. So what do you think instruction is? Instruction is going to be how we deliver this to the classroom and how we're going to deliver the information in order for them to get to our goal, our target, our end in mind. And the reason we talk about these three words, because they all seem very simple words, but in our heads we all have a little bit different definition of them. So in our case, the curriculum is going to be the TEKS and the resources provided by the district. Our assessment is how we're going to use that to be flexible in our lessons as we're doing ongoing assessments, and how we're going to assess at the end to make sure that they have the big picture, their goal that we want them to reach. And our instruction is going to be our how. How are we going to get there? As teachers, how are we going to present this information to them? So you want to keep these three things in mind for you as we go through, because it'll make a lot more sense as we're putting it together. So when I think about effective planning, this is how I think about it, and this is how the information was presented to me, and ever since I've seen it like that, that's how I've been able to make sense in my head about how to be an effective planner. So in the middle, we want all of these things to overlap for student learning. Our whole goal is for student learning. We want them to be able to be successful in the things that we're teaching them. So the three words that we've already talked about: curriculum, assessment, instruction, all of those things incorporate to give us student learning. If we can't have one without the other, we need to notice how they're all connected. They all relate. Our instruction relates to our curriculum. Our curriculum relates to assessment. Our assessment relates to our instruction. We can't assess them on something that we haven't taught. And we can't assess them differently than we taught them. So if we're teaching them how to describe, we have to assess them on how to describe. And that's where we're going to go into our TEKS in a minute for how that makes sense. So our instruction, once again, is how will we teach so our students will learn? What are we going to do as educators to help them reach that goal? It might look differently every day in your classroom. You might be describing, you might be comparing, you might have hands-on, you might have experiments in science. You might have them discussing and discovering. That's all instruction, and you have to know your standard and your goal in order to plan that instruction. You can't teach them to describe something when the TEKS says to compare. You have to know where that goal is. So our curriculum is what do we want students to learn and how. What do we want them to learn, and how are they going to have to do that? Are they going to have to break it apart? Are they just going to have knowledge? Are they going to have to demonstrate? That goes back to those TEKS. Now our assessment, how will we know what students have learned? So how are we going to prove that they've learned it, and how are we going to know that they've mastered the subject that we just taught them? And I will give you a copy of this so that you will have it to keep in mind and maybe use it as you're planning. So let's think about where we've been. So what has planning looked like so far for you? What does planning look like in your group? We're all spread out between grade levels, and I know we plan as grade levels and it all looks differently. So I want you to go around your table and just share what your planning looks like. There's no right or wrong answer here. We're just saying where we are and where we want to be in our planning comes. So where we've been. So as I'm walking around, I'm hearing that some people are just there sharing information. So somebody plans, someone brings it. You're not really breaking down the TEKS. I'm seeing that some people start with the TEKS and they are going and planning from there. And I'm hearing that some people start with their higher order thinking questions and they plan from there. So those are all great strategies, but we're going to see if we can all make a plan that we're all doing the same thing and we're all using the same model. It might look a little bit different, but we're using the same model to be effective planners. One thing I want to share with you is the district that I have been in, a few years ago, they used all scripted lessons. And so as the students are changing and growing and we're having students come in with technology and so many different kinds of learners, the district realized that that wasn't working. So now they're trying to change the way that planning is done and letting the teachers be flexible and using their knowledge for instruction. So I want you to think about that. Think about the districts that you've been in. If you've been in this district for a while, what planning has looked like, where you've been with the curriculum department in your district, and where you think that they should go. So again, I just wanted to throw that back up really quick to kind of remind you, keep those three words in mind. Curriculum, assessment, instruction always equals student learning. We can't just get student learning by curriculum, or just by assessing, or just by giving instruction. We have to use all three of those to give them to the goal, the target that we want them to reach. So there's going to be 3 stages to this breaking down and really understanding what effective learning is. So the first stage is desired results. What do we want them to do? What do we want students to learn, and the how? How are they going to learn? And when I say how, I don't mean the instruction piece. I mean the what does the state standard tell us they're going to have to do? Are they going to have to build? Are they going to have to describe? Are they going to have to tell us the cause and effect? What are they going to have to do? So you have to start with unpacking the TEKS. This is so important to start your plan with this, because this is what the state tells us our students have to know when they leave us. And this is something I'm very, very passionate about, is really understanding what the state standards are telling us and really reading them. So just to kind of give you some background of why this is a huge passion of mine, is because I was on a team this past year that they didn't read the TEKS at all. They didn't know what the students were supposed to learn. They picked activities that were cute, they thought they were doing, they should do with their students, but they never ever opened the TEKS to look at them. And so this was just a passion of mine, really demonstrating to them what it means to look at the TEKS and what it means to unpack and know what they're supposed to do. So to kind of break down the different parts of the standards, and this was very beneficial to me, and that's why I'm sharing it with you. At the very top, right beside the number, you are going to have the strand, whether that's numbers and operations in math or geometry, whatever that is, whatever basically the skill that they need, this subject that is, it's going to be right there. So this strand is about numbers and operations. So everything under the strand has to do with the number and operations. If it were a geometry strand, everything under it is going to tell you something about geometry that they need to know. So you have your strands. It kind of gives you your subject. I like to think of it as a little umbrella. And then next, it's going to be the knowledge and skill statement. So everything under your knowledge and skill statement with your student expectations on there, you have to be able to do that with the knowledge and skill statement. So the knowledge and skill statement in this TEK says the student applies mathematical process standards to understand how to represent and compare whole numbers, the relative position and magnitude of whole numbers and relationships within the numeration system related to the place value. So the student has to know that. So when you look at the student expectations below, it tells you the ways that they are going to do that and kind of breaks it down to it a little bit. So you have A, B, and C. Some of these different TEKs have more, and they have to go to more detail. So you can look at A, B, and C. So when you're teaching a lesson, you might choose how they're going to do that. Choose one expectation that you're going to teach today, and then the next one that you're going to do the next day. But they have to know how to do all of these things by the time that they leave you. The next thing that I look at when I'm looking at unpacking the TEKs is I look at the verbs, because that tells me when they're tested how they're going to have to do that and what that looks like. So like for instance, I've already gone through and I've highlighted the verbs through here. So we have applies, understand, represent, compare, use, compose, decompose, use, represent, generate. So that's very important. So what I've given to you, and I also have the nouns underlined. So what I've given to you is I've given you a unit that's coming up for your grade level. And what I want you to do is that unit has the TEK right on top. I want you to pick one of those TEKs, and I want you to go through and read it with your table. They're all math. I'm sorry I didn't mention that. And I want you to highlight the verbs and underline all the nouns.